Hello, fellow gamers. For those of you who've been playing the game, here's a little secret for you. It's pretty easy to miss, but if you pay really close attention, you may notice that Sora, the guy you're playing as in this game, is carrying a giant anime key sword. Yeah, I know, right? Shocker. I had the exact same reaction when I first noticed. It's a good thing you guys have me here to point these things out for you. I mean, what would you guys do without me? Well, in total, he can possess up to 18 of these different anime key swords. So, the big question that brought you all here, which Keyblades are the best, and which Keyblades are Metal Chocobo? Which Keyblades are more useful in the game, and which ones are... yeah, you get the idea. Well, unlike most other Keyblade rankings, I'm actually not going to tell you my own opinion. I'm instead going to bring up this chart, the one that you're seeing on screen right now, which contains the parameters for which each Keyblade will be judged. Each Keyblade will gain a final Keyblade score after getting a number of points in each of the 7 attributes on this table. So, rather than placing a Keyblade higher on the list because I personally like it, or because the fanbase at large likes it, I'm instead going to give them a more objective ranking, for which of them are actually good, and which of them are actually the worst. So, as you can see on screen right now, a Keyblade will gain 1 point for every point of strength that it has. But, because a single point of magic is worth more than a single point of strength, I've given the Keyblade an extra 5 points for every point of magic that it has. Keyblades also have their own special crit rate, which appears on the finishing moves. But because this is luck reliant, I've given them only half a point for every 10% crit chance they have. There are 4 reflection scores in the game. 1, 30, 60, and 90. It gains 0 points if it has a 1 in reflection, because that's basically 0 reflection. It gains 1 point for a 30, 2 points for a 60, and 3 points for a 90. The Keyblade will gain 1 point, as well, for every tier of length that it has. If it is a short Keyblade, it gets 1 point. If it's a medium length Keyblade, it gets 2 points. And if it's a long Keyblade, it gets 3 points. Now that the Keyblade stats themselves are out of the way, let's look at 2 other categories that will determine a Keyblade's value. Firstly, how early do you get this Keyblade in the game? Now the game is split into 3 sections. Early game, which ranges from anywhere from the dive to the heart all the way up to Agrabah. Mid game, which goes from Monstro to the Kyrie rescue. And the late game, which is anything after the Kyrie rescue. Early game Keyblades will gain a +6. Mid game Keyblades will get +4. And late game Keyblades gain +1. So, why 1 and not 2 just to keep with the trend? Because by the time you get a late game Keyblade, not only do you have less use for it, you've basically proven that you don't need it. Now finally, Keyblades will gain 1 penalty point, that means they lose 1 point, for every point of difficulty that is required to get it. If it requires no difficulty at all to obtain, it gains -0. If it requires overcoming some small time challenge, then it gains -1 point. If it is a medium challenge, it loses 2 points, and if the challenge is very hard, it will lose the full 3 points. Well, with the intro and grading parameters out of the way, let's jump straight into the video. Number 18. Taking the spot of the worst Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of a staggering 2.5, we have what is by far the worst weapon in this game. You all know it. It's One Winged Angel. Yep, you were probably expecting to see this one somewhere near the bottom of the list. Oh my god, look at all those red zones. Now, at first glance, this Keyblade's fairly decent. It has a +8 in strength and will do an extra 16 damage if it scores a critical hit. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, this Keyblade's crit rate is only 10%. There is only one Keyblade in the game with a worse crit rate than this, and that's the other fan-voted worst Keyblade, Metal Chocobo. This Keyblade actually does have some things going for it, though. It gains the full 3 points being a long weapon, and its deflection score is the highest in the game at 90, giving it another +3. But as you can see, this Keyblade loses those points almost immediately afterwards by being both a late-game Keyblade and requiring you to overcome a very hard challenge to obtain it. Sephiroth was once considered one of the hardest bosses in all of gaming, so this Keyblade receives the maximum penalty. If I were to grade this on difficulty to get alone, this Keyblade's score would easily be below 0. But since I'm not that unfair on this Keyblade, it only gets 2.5. Now, despite all these negatives, the thing that really gets this Keyblade down is its -2 in magic. Because of this, it loses 10 Keyblade points. If we simply neutralised this stat and gave it back those 10 points, it would just barely creep into the 17th place by half a point. That is how bad that -10 lets this thing down. Its main use, really, is as a bragging rights weapon for beating Sephiroth. But it's not even good at that anymore, because nowadays we have a trophy that pops when you beat him.
That's the power of the Keyblade!
So, in summary, this Keyblade is inferior in strength to many of the other Keyblades that you will have by the time you get to this one. It requires defeating one of the hardest bosses in gaming to obtain it. It has a low crit rate, despite its crit damage being its main gimmick. And it's only obtainable very, very late in the game. Oh, and one more thing. The main gimmick of this Keyblade, the +16 in damage on the crit. Well, this is also useless if you happen to be above level 60, because there is actually a strength cap in this game, which means that bosses will only take a certain amount of damage from Sora per hit, which means this crit rate will actually do 0 damage if you bother to level Sora up at all. So not only is this Keyblade useless, its main gimmick is neutralised by simply playing the game properly. This Keyblade easily takes the cake as the single worst Keyblade in the game. Number 17. Alright guys, place your bets. Which Keyblade do you think is the second worst in the game? Come on. Come on, anyone? Anyone? Yes, you know it already. Metal Chocobo. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's not Metal Chocobo. This Keyblade is actually far worse than that. You'll be surprised to learn about it though. The second worst Keyblade in the game, with a total Keyblade score of 12, is actually Oblivion. Yep, the fan favourite Keyblade wielded by Roxas himself is actually the second worst in the original game. Well, let's look at the stats. This Keyblade has a pretty decent strength stat of 11, but it loses almost half those points immediately afterwards with its -1 in magic. Because magic is so useful in this game, if you decrease it, you'd better have a good reason for it. This Keyblade simply never makes up for the magic debuff. Its deflection stat also doesn't exist, and because it's a late game Keyblade, it only gains 1 point in that area. It does gain 3 points for being a long Keyblade, and it's easy to obtain, so it doesn't receive any penalties. To get this Keyblade, all you have to do is come back to Hollow Bastion for the second visit, and then revisit the place where Kyrie's stasis pod was. Simply open up the chest that appears in front of it, for the second worst Keyblade in the game. But the positives of this Keyblade simply do not make up for the decrease in magic. And as we know, in this game, this Keyblade's often replaced by the Divine Rose, which has received a buff in the final mix version to be slightly better than this Keyblade. The only time anyone actually uses this Keyblade is in speedruns, simply because getting the Divine Rose requires you to sit through a 2-minute unskippable cutscene. Yeah, think about that. This Keyblade's main claim to fame is the fact that it's used by speedrunners. Not because of how good it is, mind you, but because it requires a 2-minute unskippable cutscene to obtain. You Oblivion stans must be feeling so proud. This Keyblade, in retrospect, is actually pretty bad, easily the second worst in the game. So, sorry out there for Roxas fans, this Keyblade is extremely bad. In the final mix version, anyway. Now, in the original PS2 version, this Keyblade was actually the chosen endgame weapon of choice for most players. In the original game, this thing actually had a higher critical hit strength bonus of +4. However, because it was actually nerfed or whatever in the final mix version, it's now inferior to its main rival, the Divine Rose. I don't know why they nerfed this Keyblade in favour of buffing Divine Rose, especially because this thing is a fan favourite. But nevertheless, even if they didn't nerf this Keyblade, here's the thing, Oblivion stans, it would still be in 17th place. Number 16. Okay guys, the third worst Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 13. Yeah, it's the Kingdom Key. Yep, the starting weapon is the third worst in the game. As you'd expect from the starting weapon, it's fairly weak as far as Keyblades go. It's tied for the lowest strength in the game with Diamond Dust. But unlike Diamond Dust, which gets an additional 15 points because of its +3 in magic, the Kingdom Key doesn't have any big stats to give it quite the same kind of boost. Now, as the earliest Keyblade in the game, it requires no difficulty to obtain, and it gains the maximum early game bonus of +6. Its deflection is middle of the road, giving it +1, and it's a medium length Keyblade, giving it 2 more points there. This Keyblade is the most used Keyblade in the franchise, appearing in some form or another in every mainline Kingdom Hearts game except Birth by Sleep. If we were giving out any additional points for cross-series utility, then this Keyblade would get a much higher slot on this list. But for now, it gets a comfortable slot as the third worst Keyblade in the game. Now, you'd expect the first Keyblade in the game to be one of the weakest. It actually fulfills its role as the starting weapon pretty well. It doesn't provide the largest strength bonuses and doesn't add very much in terms of crit rate or magic. But at the same time, it isn't a very bad weapon for the time you get it. It's largely just average as far as early game weapons go. Not really leaning in any particular direction overall, it seems like it's designed to be replaced very quickly. Overall, it's got a low power, but it is a very balanced Keyblade. Because of this, however, it's quickly replaced, and as a result, it takes our number 16 slot on the list. Number 15. Well, as the fourth worst Keyblade in the game, beating out the Kingdom Key with a staggering Keyblade score of 13.1, is at long last the Metal Chocobo. Yeah, it turns out this Keyblade's not quite so bad as you guys thought, huh? Well, it's only slightly better than the starting weapon, but... well, most people give this Keyblade a pass because they get it in the same tournament as the Olympia, the Hercules Cup. So it's completely useless, completely overshadowed by a much stronger Keyblade, right? Well, this actually isn't true. You get this weapon for defeating Cloud in Seed 4 of the Hercules Cup, which can be accessed at any time from the mid-game. You don't even need to complete the entire Hercules Cup to get it. Olympia, on the other hand, is gained from defeating all 3 main cups, Phil, Pegasus, and Hercules. This weapon is much easier to get a hold of than the Olympia Keyblade. Now, as you can see, this Keyblade is actually pretty decent. It's a long Keyblade with a deflection stat of 90, giving it a +3 in both stats. Then it gains a +4 from being a mid-game Keyblade. It also gains an extra 9 points for its strength. It only has a 2% crit chance, and since we're only giving half a point for every 10 in crit chance, we have to give it 0.1 points for its crit stat, which is why it only beats out the Kingdom Key by 0.1 points. The real area that this Keyblade is let down is its -1 in magic, which gives it a -5 in penalty on its total score. Just to put this into perspective, if we were to neutralise this stat and make it 0 magic instead of -1, this Keyblade would shoot up to being the 9th best Keyblade in the game. Yeah, that's how badly this -1 in stat lets this thing down. Without that magic debuff, it would be better than the Olympia by 0.1 points. Number 14. Taking our number 14 slot as the 5th worst Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 14.5, is... the Jungle King. Well, you'd expect the second weapon in the game to be only slightly better than the first. It is designed to be an upgrade, after all. It's not much of a compliment to the Kingdom Key that this thing is literally made out of twigs and wood chips, but hey, at least it's a more useful weapon than Oblivion, right? Anyway. This Keyblade actually has the same stats as the Kingdom Key, just distributed slightly differently. It maximises its efficiency as an early game weapon by transferring half of its crit chance and all of its deflection stat into strength and length, making this Keyblade a more offensive weapon than the Kingdom Key. This Keyblade has a +5 in strength, and its main gimmick is that it's a long weapon, being a tier 3 in Keyblade length, which actually helps it out a lot more than you think it would. If you chose to come to Deep Jungle before Wonderland, you'll be able to use this weapon against the Trickmaster Heartless. And the Trickmaster boss is designed around being too tall to hit from the ground, meaning that you have to jump onto the table and chairs in order to get a good shot on it. But with the Jungle King, for no extra cost in magic, you can hit him just by jumping from ground level. It also continues to be useful all the way up to Agrabah, making fights against Jafar and Iago a little more manageable. Jafar Genie is often thought of as the worst boss in the game because of Iago shenanigans in that fight. However, because this Keyblade has a 1 in deflection, it'll cause Sora to recoil if he ever has to clash with an enemy, such as the Pot Centipede. This Keyblade's main claim to fame, though, as you can see, is its additional +6 for being an early game Keyblade. If this Keyblade were to be gained in the mid-game, it would lose 2 extra points. But guess what? It would still be better than Oblivion. You know what? Let's call up Squaresoft. I want to see Roxas dual-wielding Oathkeeper and Jungle King. Number 13. Taking the slot as the 5th worst Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 15, we have the Wishing Star Keyblade. Well, the Wishing Star Keyblade gains a +5 in strength, and because it's a mid-game Keyblade, it gains an additional +4 in that stat as well. It's also really easy to get hold of, basically being a story Keyblade. However, this is where the benefits mostly stop. It has no deflection stat, and no length. And while it receives no penalties for magic or difficulty to obtain, it's absolutely not very useful as an offensive weapon. This Keyblade's main gimmick, as you can see on screen right now, is its incredible 100% chance to get a crit on its finisher, completely removing the lock aspect on the crit score. However, to keep things fair, it still only gains a +5 for that score, which is the best crit score of any Keyblade in this game. This Keyblade can be used against the Black Fungus Heartless, which will drop money, mystery goo, and their own unique item, the Mystery Mold, which you can sell for 9,999 money in the original Kingdom Hearts game, and 3,000 in the final mix version. This Keyblade makes more of a money farming tool than an actual weapon. Number 12. As the 7th worst Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 16, we have Pumpkinhead. Yeah, Pumpkinhead is lower down on the list than Crabclaw. Now let's look at the stats. This Keyblade gains a +8 for its strength stat, and a +4 for its mid-game status, +3 for its length, and +2 for its 40% crit chance. So on paper, this Keyblade is pretty good. Definitely a decent mid-game weapon, right? So what lets this thing down so much? Well, unfortunately, this thing's deflection stat that's worse quality. If we gave this thing a deflection stat of 90, it would actually be on par with its rival Keyblade, the Crabclaw. But because of its low deflection stat, it takes the inferior slot on the list. Number 11. Okay, for our 8th worst Keyblade on the list, with a combined Keyblade score of 17, is 3 Wishes. 3 Wishes gets a pretty decent +6 in strength, which makes it the strongest of the early game weapons. Speaking of which, it's an early game weapon, so it gains the last +6 score on this list for its early game status. Its medium length giving it +2, and its deflection stat is 60, giving it another +2. The only downside to this Keyblade is the fact that it's so quickly replaced after Monstro, which causes it to lose most of its overall usefulness in the game. But it's actually a better weapon to carry to Hollow Bastion than Pumpkinhead, which is what most players replace it with. Number 10. Well, as our number 10 Keyblade, and the best of the worst Keyblades in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 18, we have Olympia. Yeah, this Keyblade's pretty great for the mid-game if you can get your hands on it. Most players will use this Keyblade along with the Counter Guard ability to make the fight with Riku a bit easier. You basically just have to spam the attack button the whole fight with this Keyblade equipped. This Keyblade gains a +10 in strength, and has a slight edge over its rival, the Metal Chocobo, by not eating into your magic stat to use it. It only has a medium length, which makes its range of attack a little bit lower than that of Metal Chocobo. Its crit range is 20%, which is the same as the Kingdom Key. However, the key feature of this weapon is its deflection stat, which is the primary use for it by most players in the game, which is with the aforementioned Riku Ansem fight. It has a medium length, placing it in the same length tier as the starting weapon, the Kingdom Key, and netting it an additional +2 Keyblade points for this score alone. Now, the main place that this Keyblade is let down is in the difficulty required to get it. To get this Keyblade, you have to complete the Phil, Pegasus, and Hercules Cup in the Olympus Coliseum. This puts it below its main rival Metal Chocobo in terms of accessibility. It gains the medium penalty of -2 points for its difficulty. Completing the main 3 cups of Olympus Coliseum is not exactly the hardest challenge to complete, but it isn't exactly a 5-minute detour either, as it is with Metal Chocobo. Of course, obtaining this Keyblade means that you've met all the requirements for Metal Chocobo as well, so this can be taken into consideration. Unlike Metal Chocobo though, this Keyblade is not let down by its magic stat. Overall, this Keyblade's main gimmick is being a good striking weapon. It will rarely, if ever, cause you to get recoil upon being parried, which means that when paired with the correct ability setup, its high strength set can be used to great effect to simply mash X to win. Number 9. So, which Keyblade takes the middle slot for being the most mediocre Keyblade in the game? And it turns out that it's all of them. Yeah, you heard me right. All 5 of them. Because we actually have a 5-way tie for 5th place. So let's actually skip a few and get to our real entry slot. Number 5. With a combined Keyblade score of 19, we have a 5-way tie between Crabclaw, Oathkeeper, Divine Rose, Lionheart, and Diamond Dust. Wait, what? Diamond Dust? Surely I must have miscalculated somewhere, right? Well, no. Diamond Dust gains an immediate +3 in strength, and then gains an additional +15 because it has the best magic stat in the game. And it has a medium length and a 20% crit chance, which absolutely isn't bad. However, this is where the benefits end. This Keyblade, when you think about it, is just a spell catalyst. It's basically one of Donald's staffs. It receives 1 point for being a late-game Keyblade, and then 0 points for its deflection stat, which is only 1, the lowest in the game. This is certainly not intended to be a clashing weapon. Also, it requires you to beat the Ice Titan in the gold match of the Olympus Cup to even put this thing in your possession. As one of the harder challenges in the game, this means that, just like the One-Winged Angel, it receives the maximum penalty of -3 for this. So even though this Keyblade is very useful the moment you get hold of it, it is outperformed in usefulness by a lot of other Keyblades on this list. Crabclaw. Okay, onto the Crabclaw. This Keyblade has a +6 points because of its strength stat, which makes it just as good of a striking weapon as the 3 Wishes, which you've probably been playing as for the bulk of the game before getting hold of this one. With a +1 in magic, this Keyblade gains an additional +5 points for this, and its deflection and length being failed in the middle of the road don't do anything to hinder its usefulness. It gets no penalty for difficulty, and gets an additional +4 for its stats as a mid-game Keyblade. It's a solid mid-game story weapon, and receives a better score than its rival, the Pumpkinhead, because it isn't let down by any of its stats. Oathkeeper. Okay, Oathkeeper is another story Keyblade, but as a late game weapon it only gains 1 point for this. It gives out +9 in strength, and even provides a +1 in magic, giving it an additional +5 Keyblade points. It's a medium-sized weapon with a 40% crit rate. It basically has no deflection stat though, just like its partner weapon Oblivion. Its total score is vastly better than Oblivion's though. Lionheart. Lionheart is another late game weapon. However, it's actually a very solid weapon. Once you have it in your hands, it's actually just a better version of Oathkeeper. It has a plus 10 in strength to Oathkeeper's plus 9. It's a long weapon with a 90 in deflection. The main problem with this weapon though is the fact that you get it in the late game and it requires medium level difficulty to obtain. You have to defeat Cloud and Leon in the Hades Cup, which lowers the usefulness of this weapon drastically enough to have it on the same level as the aforementioned Oathkeeper. Divine Rose. The Divine Rose has a staggering plus 13 in strength. Just to put it into perspective, the ultimate weapon only gives you a plus 14 in strength. Divine Rose has 60 in deflection, and a 40% crit rate, giving it a plus 2 in both stats. It has no magic penalty, and is very easy to obtain. This Keyblade is mostly let down by its short length, and by its status as a late game Keyblade. If either of these things were increased, this Keyblade would be 4th place instead of 5th. This weapon is a very solid late game weapon, and easily makes its way into the end of the world. But now, because all 5 of them share the same 5th place score, if I have to rank them, it would go something like this. Crabclaw is number 9, Oathkeeper is 8, Divine Rose is 7, Lionheart is 6, and Diamond Dust is 5. Number 4. Well, we're running out of Keyblades here, so let's just jump straight into it. With a Keyblade score of 19.5, we have the 4th best Keyblade in the game, Fairy Harp. Fairy Harp is the last story weapon that is gained in the mid-game, just barely nudging it into gaining a plus 4 score. This is of course the second to last Keyblade that is actually available in the mid-game though, only losing out to the Lady Luck Keyblade, which is only available after unlocking the White Trinity mark in Hollow Bastion. This Keyblade only appears after the Captain Hook boss fight, and after you've sealed the Keyhole to Neverland. It will most likely be the Keyblade of choice for most players through Hollow Bastion, all the way up to the return trip after the Divine Rose becomes available. It has a plus 8 in strength, and a plus 1 in magic, giving it an extra 5 Keyblade points. The main strength of this Keyblade is of course the aforementioned magic stat. Other than that, it doesn't have a whole lot going for it. It has a 10% crit chance, which is just as bad as the One-Winged Angels, meaning that it only gains half a point for this stat. Its deflection stat is 30, which is the same stat as the Kingdom Key, only increasing this Keyblade's overall score by 1 point. This Keyblade is actually a bit of a surprise on the list, given the only real advantage is its slightly higher strength, literally the same as the One-Winged Angels. And its magic stat makes up around 25% of the Keyblade points this Keyblade gets. If I were giving out rankings for the worst designed Keyblades, then this one would be 2nd place for that stat alone. But I'm not one to judge on appearances. I am, however, just like the ex-wives of many Oblivion stands, one to judge on length. Yes, by the way, Oblivion stands, it does matter. Because of this problem, this weapon's overall utility is dramatically reduced, bringing this Keyblade to only a plus 1 in this stat. Even if it were a longer weapon though, it still wouldn't have enough Keyblade points to overcome our number 3 slot. Number 3. Well, we're down to our last 3. So, taking the bronze trophy for the 3rd best Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 22, we have Spellbinder. This Keyblade is actually mostly let down by its strength stat. Its deflection is 30, the same score as the Kingdom Key, which gives it an extra plus 1 for that. It's not difficult to obtain, it just requires learning all the base level spells, which you can get by the time you reach Neverland as long as you've completed Halloween Town for the gravity spell. So as a mid-game Keyblade, it gains a plus 4 for that stat. This Keyblade is actually useful to the player for around about as long as the Pumpkinhead is, which is good for about half the game. It receives no penalties for difficulty, and its plus 2 in magic gives it an additional plus 10 Keyblade points. It has an average crit rate of 20%, once again similar to the Kingdom Key, giving it 1 extra point. Overall, this Keyblade is one of the best weapons in the game, and until you pick up the Diamond Dust, it's a solid option for its ability to increase your magic and increase the length of your summoning meter. Just to talk a bit more about this Keyblade, it's basically a firm upgrade to the Kingdom Key. The Spellbinder is what the Kingdom Key would be if it were scaled to the mid-game. It has a good magic stat, only beaten out by Diamond Dust, by the way. It has a +4 strength to the Kingdom Key's +3. It has the same length, deflection, and crit rate as the Kingdom Key. It's basically the Kingdom Key Plus, and shows you just how great the Kingdom Key could have been if it gained a boost in magic as well. Number 2. Well, taking the silver trophy for the second best Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade Score of 24, we have Lady Luck. Yeah, you all knew this one was coming. It takes no difficulty to obtain, has the same magic stat as Spellbinder, and gains the same +4 for being a mid-game weapon. Now, this weapon is only available for the very end of the mid-game, which overall means that Spellbinder actually finds more use in the game itself. Spellbinder also has a 30 in deflection, which makes it more useful for fighting against Riku in Hollow Bastion, for example. This Keyblade is to the Spellbinder as the Spellbinder is to the Kingdom Key, with one exception. Lady Luck has a deflection stat of 1, which means that it's not really meant to be a clashing weapon. This is the only area in which it's inferior to Spellbinder, though. It's designed for offense only, which is shown by its +7 in strength. It even has the exact same crit rate as Spellbinder, which itself is the same as the starting weapon, the Kingdom Key. Overall, this Keyblade is just a better version of Spellbinder. It's Spellbinder Plus, which also makes it a Kingdom Key ++. Lady Luck is also a better Keyblade to use against endgame mobs like the Invisibles and Angel Stars, allowing them to be taken down in decent time while also providing a good decent boost to your magic stat, which can be used to supplement its main advantage in strength while using stunning spells like Thunder or defensive spells like Summoning, Arrow, or Cure. Lady Luck matches the Spellbinder in every other stat, and even exceeds its strength stat. So, as it's a better version of Spellbinder, Lady Luck will take a comfortable slot above Spellbinder as the second best Keyblade in the game. Number 1. Well, there's only one Keyblade left, and if you've been keeping up with the list, you may already know what it is. The gap isn't even close. So, taking the gold trophy for the best Keyblade in the game, with a combined Keyblade score of 30, we have the Ultima weapon. I actually designed the Keyblade scoring parameters specifically to try and lower the value of this Keyblade. I myself was surprised when this thing not only came out on top, but exceeded the second place spot by 6 points. If we take away all the penalties that this Keyblade accrues by being very hard to obtain, being a late game Keyblade as well, this Keyblade would have a total score of 36, a full 12 points higher than the second place entry. This Keyblade has a +14 in strength, +2 in magic, a 90 in deflection, and a 40% crit rate, and it's a long Keyblade on top of all of that. This Keyblade is maxed out in every stat except magic. The only weapon that exceeds this in any way is Diamond Dust, and only in magic. The Ultima weapon's only real letdowns are the fact that it's a late game weapon, and it requires completing a very hard challenge to get it. That being collecting all the synthesis materials from every mob heartless in the game, all the way up to the end of the world. And then synthesizing every other item in the Moogle shop before this one. This means that it loses those 3 to 5 points for being in the late game, and also loses an additional 3 for the challenge required to get it. Despite receiving the exact same penalty score as our worst Keyblade on the list, the One-Winged Angel, this Keyblade still manages to be the best in the game by a wide margin of 6 Keyblade points. So yeah, if you were wondering, is this weapon worth getting? Well, yes it is. This Keyblade is useful for pretty much every task the late game has to offer. Do you want to defeat the Ice Titan? Ultima weapon. Do you want to speed through the Hades Cup and both of its side trials? Ultima weapon. Do you want to earn the worst weapon on the list, One-Winged Angel? 2 words. Ultima weapon. Once you have this weapon, there is pretty much no reason to use any other weapon except for Diamond Dust. Say if you want to do something magic related, like fighting Pink Agaricus or something. Now, with this weapon, you can take the world record fighting Sephiroth. Now, I don't personally have this record, but here is a good example of how quickly you can beat him with this weapon. This weapon is this game's version of Keyblade Perfection. Okay, now that I've gone over the main meat and bones of this list, let's go over one more type of list quickly. There are those of you who may have noticed that I've given the Keyblade 5 points for every 1 point of magic that it has. And some of you may think that magic is less useful. Maybe you don't want to use it for some kind of self-imposed challenge. Maybe you just prefer hitting the X button and sometimes using Aero or Cure to win. Okay, for those of you who don't value magic in this game, I've actually created a brief second list where magic is neutralized and controlled for. So here is that list. Okay, so as you would expect, when magic is useless to a player, of course the one Keyblade that is basically a spell catalyst is the worst on the list. With 4 Keyblade points, the new number 18 is Diamond Dust. Spellbinder then replaces Oblivion as number 17 with 12 points. One Winged Angel gets a 10-point boost to 16th place with 12.5 Keyblade points. The Kingdom Key is 15th place. Crabclaw, Lionheart, Oathkeeper and Lady Luck are 11th place. Fairy Harp and Jungle King are 9th place. Wishing Star is 8th. Pumpkinhead is 7. 3 Wishes and Oblivion share the 5th place slot with 17 points. Olympia is 4th place with 18. But here's the real kicker for you Metal Chocobo haters. Metal Chocobo actually takes the bronze medal on this list, with 18.1 points. Yeah, think about that. If you don't care about the magic stats, Metal Chocobo is actually a better Keyblade than its rival Olympia. In fact, there are only 2 Keyblades that are overall better than this one in this category. Divine Rose now takes the silver medal with 19 points, so taking the gold trophy in the magic list category, it's still the Ultima Weapon with 20 Keyblade points. Yep, Ultima Weapon is still the best Keyblade. But if the player in question doesn't care about magic, this Keyblade is only slightly better than Metal Chocobo. So yeah, for those of you out there who don't care about taking a hit of 1 MP point, Metal Chocobo is the best Keyblade for the middle section of the game. Now here's one more list showing all the Keyblades without the difficulty penalty or the early/mid/late game bonus. Of course, Ultima Weapon takes the win again, because the penalties are actually one of the only things stopping this thing from being massively higher than every other Keyblade. Ultima Weapon rises to 32 total points in this category. So, in summary, no matter how you slice it, the Ultima Weapon is the best Keyblade in the game. Yep, if you can get your hands on it, and you don't care about the time investment required to get it, it is absolutely worth synthesizing this weapon. If you're a big magic user and you care about the specifics of when and where you get a weapon, the Ultima Weapon is still the best. But if you don't care about magic, Metal Chocobo, for all the hate it gets, is actually the 3rd best in the game. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share this video with your friends. Doing any of these things will help my channel to grow, and will help me to be recognised by the YouTube algorithm.